Welcome to the tutorial for the Rustington dress. I'm going to start with prep. So we've got a pocket to prep first. Here we go. This is my pocket. I've got two. You don't have to put these on. Obviously they're optional. You could just put one. You'll see the pattern is graded for different sizes. So I've chosen the middle size here. And you've got some fold lines here and a stitch line that I've marked with little snips at the side there. So let's get rid of one of these and just focus on this one. So I'm going to fold on my fold line, right sides together, and then fold up my 1 centimetre seam allowance. So where I've folded that seam allowance up, it should meet that third little snip, which is the stitch line. So I'm just going to stitch down these little corners, centimetre seam allowance from the edge, just to secure them down. And this is basically just bagging out the top corners of the pocket. It just makes it a little bit neater. You don't get to see the seam allowance inside the top of the pocket. So it should look like that. I'm just going to snip some of this bulk away. There we go. Just turn these corners through. Give them a little wiggle and ever so carefully poke your corners out. I suggest using a turning tool rather than scissors, but these are not sharp and pointy. So now I'm going to give this a press. There we go. All pressed the seam allowances and the top, and I'm going to stitch on the edge. So I'm just stitching this top flap down. There we go. That's your pocket prepped. Next on the prepping list is cuffs. So I've got a pair of cuffs. Here we go. They're just rectangles and there's a fold line down the middle. This is a notch for your underlap where your button is going to be stitched. So let's take one cuff. So we fold along the long edge, and where are my notches? Oh, there they are. They're on the other side. So that was my underlap. So I'm going to pop those together and I'm going to start stitching from that notch and go around the corner. And then on the other end, I'm just going to stitch straight down. Okay, so here we go. Back tack to start, centimetre seam allowance. And I'm going to do, you might have seen me do this on other tutorials, just the little diagonal stitch, just one stitch across the corner. Just gives a tiny little bit more space to turn your corner through nicely when it's a slightly thicker fabric. I'll show you that close up again in a minute. And then just straight down the edge here again, centimetre seam allowance. So there you go. Let me show you the other side. You can see it better, look, with the interfacing. So just clipping the corners, trimming down the seam allowance so it's not too bulky. And there you go. You can see that single stitch that goes off on a diagonal there. And snipping right into that notch further. And snip the little stragglers off. And then you just need to turn it through. There we go. Just use my scissors to help a little bit there gently. And that's one cuff turned through. Let's have a look at that. Just needs a press now. There we go, one cuff. So the final prep we're going to do is for the collar. Now here's my collar piece, cut 2 to fold. And I've marked my centres there, look, you'll see, just with a tiny little snip. You can use a pencil or something if that's easier for you. Just helps when attaching, and this one is for the shoulder. So 2 pieces, one I've interfaced, one I haven't. I'll be honest, I don't normally interface my collars. mainly because I'm a bit special and I like my clothing to be soft. So all I've used is a really, really light interfacing here. I would use interfacing for outerwear. That would be my exception, because it usually needs a bit more stability. So starting here, all the way around and up, centimetre seam allowance, right sides together. There we go. I've done my little tricky corner thing again. Look, just doing this. There's one stitch across, just to give it a tiny bit more space. Sorry, I'm off camera a bit here. So we're just going to grade the seam allowance down. If you've got the patience, you can cut your seam allowance within your stitch line, which makes it less bulky, but hey, life's too short to stuff a mushroom. So trimming this down, and then basically I've cut into that. It's a very gradual curve, a very gentle one around the outside edge of the collar. So I've just kind of snipped in every 2.5, 3 centimetres, something like that, just to help it ease around and make it lovely and smooth. Let's get rid of all that stuff. Okay, so I'm going to now leave this seam allowance pointing that way. Then I'm going to fold my interface collar over the top of the seam allowance, and I'm going to stitch on the edge. So we're going to do a bit of understitching basically. So I'm stitching, let me show you a bit closer, right near the seam there, all the way through. So that seam allowance will be attached to that side of the collar. Here we go. Let's see if I can get you a good enough view inside while I'm stitching. You might want to press this before you stitch it as well. Okay, so I've only done, you can see the seam allowance is all attached there to the collar. I've only done that very long leaf edge. I haven't done the little edges of the collar. Let's just angle that a little bit more, as there's not a huge amount of space in that point. Push it all through. Give it a little wiggle. There we go. So I just need to give that a press now and trim off these straggly bits. There we go, nice neat stitching, one collar. Next job is the darts on the front panels. Here we are, here's my pattern piece. Now there are quite a lot of things to mark out here. You've got your pocket placement. You'll notice that this one is in the dart, so I'm not going to mark that, but I will mark these other 3, and 3 anchor points should be plenty anyway. So I'm just going to do it in a pen here. Got a felt tip, in the hopes that it will show up on the camera nicely for you. Obviously I wouldn't normally use a felt tip. So yeah, I'm literally just finding those points on both pieces before I remove the pattern piece, because you don't want wonky pockets. Okay, so that's my 3 points mark there on the one side. Let's do it on the other side as well. There we go. So you can see 3 points for the pocket there. And you've got obviously armhole notch that you need to mark, and I would mark these centre fronts as well with a little notch, because you've got a rather large seam at the front here, which I'll show you what that's for in a little while. Oh, and the darts, you need to mark the point and the bottom edges there. So I'm just going to use tiny little snips, and I'm going to mark the point of my dart. Let's get rid of all these others. And oops, there's one there. There we go. So we just need to mark the apex there. To make sure that's exactly in the right place. There we are, both sides bust up. Great. Now, I know some people like to sort of draw from that point down to the wider, but it's a straight line, so I'm not going to do it. I tend to only do that if it's a curved dart, but it is useful if you're not perhaps as experienced. There we go, a couple of pins in just so that it doesn't slip. Stitching from the wide point down to the point and sort of tapering off. So here we go. Tapering off at that point that I've marked so that I come completely off the fabric. There we go. So I'm going to press that towards the side seam. There we go, one dart. So back darts now. Same principle as before. This is my back bodice. It's cut on a fold. You'll need to mark your armhole notches. And this is my dart. You can see I've highlighted it in pen again. I find it much easier to draw around my pattern pieces in the size with a coloured pen before I cut out. Then you can't go wrong. So I've marked the ends with my little snips and I've got a pin in the top there as before. And I've marked my centre back at my neck. That'll help when I put my collar on, and at my waist there, that'll help when I put my skirt on. Always useful to have centre fronts and centre backs marked in some way. So nice big felt tip pen cross for the apex there. And then I'm going to once again fold in half. Match those little notches. Stitching towards the point and tapering off. There we go, both darts done. And they just need a press now. So I'm going to press mine towards the back. There we go. Darts done. So now we're going to stitch the centre fronts. Now I've got a nice big seam allowance here, which I'm showing you on the pattern again. This is my centre front line, so that's 3 centimetres from the edge of the pattern. I'm going to put a zip in, a nice big chunky plastic one, but you don't have to do that. If you don't want that and you just want to stitch it up, we're hoping to put a notch on the pattern here actually to show you, but as a guide, about 12 centimetres down, you just want to stitch from there down and then use your big seam allowance to fold back as we're going to do for the zip. You'll see a sample that I've done in a sort of jungly print if you go and look on the website, where I've just stitched it through and I haven't put a zip in, but you do need an opening at the top to allow for your heading. So you just need to fold back 1 centimetre and then the 2 centimetres, and I've pressed it already, and I'm going to stitch this down now. So again, if you were not having the zip, you'd just be doing this once you'd already done your centre front seam. So you'd have some lovely stitch lines on the front of your bodice. There we go. So now we're going to put the front pockets on. Got one side here. Remember where we've put these 3 anchor points. The 4th, you'll remember, sort of landed in the middle of the dart on the pattern. So we're just going to use these 3. So top 2 to start with, and then you want this to be equidistant. So I'm going to pin that first. There we go. Do use a tape measure. And then this needs to be equidistant as well. And then there you go. It all fits together beautifully, doesn't it? It comes together even though you don't have that 4th one on this particular size. So back tack, and I'm just going to do one simple stitch, but lots of opportunities for fancy top stitching on this pattern, which is really nice. Nice option. All the way around the edge. Oh, overshot by a stitch there. There we go. And back tack to finish. Set pocket on. Just trim that thread. We're ready to put the pocket on the other side now. Okay, so I'm going to put the zip in. So if this is your option, watch carefully. Here we go. I've got a plastic closed end zip. It's a nice chunky one. Two options. You can do it from the top so that it opens from the collar all the way down to the waist. Or, as I'm going to do it a bit like if it was sewn up at the front. It's going to have that 12 centimetres gap between the collar and the start of the zip. So this is my choice of option. So all I need to do is make sure that stopper is a centimetre above my seam. If you've got a metal one, you can probably use the pliers and remove any extra teeth or stoppers that are in the way. And then you just want to line that fold with the edge of the plastic teeth or metal teeth if you're using a metal one. And I'm just going to fold that tape back. Fold it under and just make it look as neat as possible, really. So there you go, you can see it just lays nicely on that seam allowance. And I'm going to sort of stitch in between the existing stitch line and the plastic teeth. You can see I've got my zip foot on there. So back tack to start, and I'm just going to stitch down parallel to that folded edge. From the top to the bottom. So stitching towards my waistline. Needle in, foot up to close the zip when you get near to it, so its bulk doesn't distort your stitching, and back tack to finish. So there you go, that's side one. Let's have a closer look. You can see the 2 rows of stitching there. I think that looks quite neat. And that's secured in nicely. Okay, so now we just literally marry up the other side, making sure those pockets are still level. So you need to join or have those folded edges touching. Let's unzip again. And now you can see the fold is on the edge of the teeth again. And let's fold this little bit of tape under again so it's nice and neat. There we go. And you just need to stitch as before now. So you've got that second row of stitching that is parallel. Let's remove some of these threads. There you go. So all you need to do now is give it a little press. That's as easy as it gets for a zip insertion, really, isn't it? There you go, all pressed and ready to go. Shoulder seams is the next job. Nice easy one. I've overlocked my shoulder seams already. And I'm just going to lay front on back, right sides together. Pop a pin in and stitch from neck to shoulder. There we go, centimetre seam allowance as usual. Tripping your threads off. There we go. And then just open them up and give them a press. There we are, shoulder seams. Next job is attaching the collar. There's my bodice, there's my collar. So this is where those centre back notches come in handy. So I'm going to pin my interfaced side of my collar to my bodice, right sides together, matching those centre back notches. Then I'm going to work my way along to the shoulder seam, and there was that notch, do you remember, at the shoulder seam? I don't think you can see it on the camera though, because I think the interfacing has stuck it together. So that matches to the seam. And then we've got the centre front of the bodice, which when we open this collar up, you want to match the centre front too. So you go down a centimetre from that raw edge, and where that point is, you want to lay the centre front at that juncture there. That's where you want to be. It's a centimetre down from the raw edge so that they meet. And then you just carry on pinning in between those points and do the same for the other side. So open up that collar, find that point that's a centimetre down and match that centre front to that point. There we go. That's it all pinned. So I'm going to stitch from that centre front point all the way to the other one, centimetre seam allowance again, back tack to start. Take your time to make sure your raw edges match and that your seam allowances aren't ruckled. So just straighten that out so everything lies nice and flat. Okay, let's take the pins out and have a look. Looking good. So I'm going to trim in every centimetre and a half or so along that edge. Just snip off any corners just to reduce the bulk a little bit. And then I'm going to push that seam allowance up inside the collar and give it a press so that it stays upwards. Okay, there we go, that's all pressed. And I've also pressed my seam allowance on the other side of the collar upwards so that I can then pin them together before I stitch. There we go. So just take a little bit of time over this. Make sure it's all smooth and that your folded edge meets your stitch line. There we go. Plenty of pins even for me. And this lovely curve we're going to stitch now right on the edge. Here we go. Stitching through all the layers of the collar. There we go. That's my stitch line. Take the pins out. Let's have a look, see how it looks. Oh, there's some stragglers there. So we'll give it a press and a trim any more threads off. There we go. And then we'll do the zip up and have a look, see how that sits. It looks pretty good at the moment. Here we are, one colour. Now the collar's on, we're going to stitch up the side seams. I've pre-overlocked my side seams again. Oops, let's snip that before I stitch. And you simply right sides together, pop a pin in and stitch with your centimetre seam allowance again. I'm starting from underarm towards the hem. There we go, and I'm going to press that open. Making good progress now. This is starting to come together. Sleeve vent next. Here's my little bit of binding. This is just cut on the straight. Doesn't need to be bias, although you could use a really pretty bias and make it a bit of a feature. So centimetre, a centimetre, and then fold them on top of each other. And I'm going to press this so that it looks like your bias binding, but it's just cut on the straight. Okay, now I need my sleeve. So you need a pair of these as always, and you've got gathering notches and the top. Sorry, it's off camera. I will move it down in a minute so you can see properly. Suddenly realised, there we go. This is where you gather to and from. This is your vent. So I've literally just snipped up to the centre of that circle. Make sure you've got your 1 snip and 2 snips for your notches on your armholes. Okay, so we just need to open this out now. This is kind of tricky to show, but it will make all sense when I've sewn it. It will be clearer, I think. How are we going? Hang on a minute, I've pinned that the wrong way around. Let's start the other end. I'm working backwards. Here we go. So you start off by matching your raw edges. So you've got your centimetre seam allowance. And then when you get to the top of that snip, the top of the vent, that needs to come to your centimetre seam allowance edge like that. So it sort of lies on the diagonal. If you've done this process before, you'll know exactly what I mean, but bear with and you will see, because this bit needs to be caught in on your sewing, but just a few threads of it. So you're just taking the tiniest seam allowance at that point, at that centre point, and then going back to your centimetre at the other end. So let me pin it and stitch it. And like I said, I promise once you see it stitched, you'll see exactly what I mean. You might want to back tack over that middle bit as well, but let's just get it stitched so you can see what you're aiming for. So I'm laying the edge of my foot against the edge of the binding because the centimetre seam allowance applies all along your binding piece. It's just the vent that the seam allowance varies on. So back tack to start and finish. Here we go, look. Now you can see. Can you see I've caught the stitching right at the edge there, and you might want to back tack it, as I said, because it's just hanging on by threads, but it doesn't have any tension on it, so it shouldn't fray. And then you literally just fold over your binding and stitch just like any other binding you might do. Just going to stitch on the edge. So again, this second stitch gives it a bit more strength at that dicey point. Your binding's just cut, so it's for the longest size, so do trim away any extra. So there you go, you can see now that is perfectly bound, all the raw edges are inside, just needs a little press. So that's how it will look. Next we're going to sew the sleeve seam. So again, I've overlocked before I stitch. Let's just trim off that extra little bit of binding there. So right sides together, from your underarm stitch towards your cuff, and then we're going to press that seam open. There we go. Seam done. Just repeat for the other sleeve. Cuffs. So you've got a little bit to gather here between the vent and the notch on the cuff. So I'm going to put some gather stitches in here. I like to do mine. I do a big stitch, usually about 5 centimetre from the raw edge, and then I go back and do another row of stitching in between that one and the raw edge again, so it's about 5mm. My machine does a little back tack automatically when it starts stitching, so they're secured at one end already. Okay, so there's my stitching. That's the back of my sleeve. So I know that this is the back of my sleeve, so this part of the vent, that binding needs to be folded in. So it's folded under, and I need the straight edge of my cuff. And remember, if you've half interfaced like I have, you've got a pair, so you need the interfaced side to be pinned to the inside. So you're doing the right side of the cuff with the interfacing on it to the wrong side of your sleeve. This part of the vent just stays flat, so it's not tucked in like the other side, because this bit folds under. This is your underlap, which you'll have your button on. So it just lies flat like that. Pop another pin in because you haven't got any gathers on that part of your sleeve cuff. One more pin in there. And then we're going to put up the gathering threads. Now, this is where my eyes are too old for doing dark colours, and I've got to try and find which side my machine's back tacked and which side it hasn't. No, definitely not that side. There we go. So, pulling these threads, always easier to pull the bobbin threads up, so that's something to remember if you struggle with gathers. Just pulling these gently. Basically just pull it up until it matches the same length as your cuff. There we go. Just going to even those out a little bit. The gathers should sort of be in line with the sleeve head. There we go, matching the raw edges. And then we're going to stitch all the way around from one end to the other, just to that one side of the cuff. Here we go. So again, arrange any gathers that need arranging as you go. Now that's one side of the cuff attached to the sleeve. Just trim off some threads, and then we're going to fold back the seam allowance on the other side of the cuff and pin it to those gathers. So I might need to trim away some of the bulk here and tuck that in. So you're tucking a centimetre under And the fold should match the stitch line that you've just sewn. There we go. And you're just now going to stitch all the way through all those layers, right on the edge of that fold. Oh, that's popped out again. There we go. I'm going to start stitching that end anyway. So stitching right on the edge all the way around. There we go. That's the inside, that's the outside. Just needs a bit of a press there. There we go. One cuff. As you can see, those gathers are sort of in line with that sleeve head. So now the cuff's on, we're ready to put the sleeves in the armholes. So I'm just going to, little reminder here of the sleeve pattern. We've got these notches on the top of the sleeve head, which is where you want to put your gathering threads. So I'm going to put those in exactly as I did before, centimetre from the edge, then half a centimetre on a big stitch. Okay, so here's my bodice again. There's my sleeve. Let's have a look at these notches. That's the front of the sleeve, that's double notch, so that's the back, so that I know that is my left sleeve. So I'm going to start by pinning my underarm sleeve seam to my side seam. Then I'm going to find the head of my sleeve notch which matches my shoulder seam. And then I'm going to match my back notches and my front notches, and then pin round until I get to my gathering threads. At which point I will then pull these up until my sleeve head fits into the armhole nicely. So you just really want the gathers at the sleeve head here. They're not big poofy sleeves, quite an understated gather really. It does just mean that it's an easier fitting sleeve, so it's more comfortable to wear. It's not tight round your bicep or anything. There we go. From that underarm seam, I'm going to stitch around centimetre seam allowance, back tack to start, all the way around, evening out those gathers as I go so that they look nice. There we go. Lots of stray threads on this project. So that fits all nicely. I'm going to overlock around the edge now. There we are, it's neatened that up nicely, hasn't it? Still a few threads that need pulling, but mostly that's neatened it up. Have a look at it from the right side. Great. Can always give that a little steam. Next up is pockets in the side seams. Again, totally optional. I know everyone seems to love a pocket. So your skirt fronts and backs are the same. You cut two and you've got two notches. This top notch matches your pocket. So that's an important one. And oh, I haven't put my little snip in for my centre front there, so I'm going to put that in now, because again, really important for when you're gathering so that you get a nice even distribution of fabric. So I'll pop a little snip in there later. Okay, let's open out this skirt panel. This is my pocket piece. You've got 2 pairs of these if you're doing a pocket each side. And there's my little notch there, and there's my little notch there. So I'm just going to pin those together, matching raw edges. There we go. And on the other side as well. This is a really quick, simple, easy way to put pockets into anything, any garment. Match that notch again. Pop a pin in. Okay, let's stitch. I'm using ever so slightly less than my centimetre seam allowance for this, like 8mm or something. You'll see why in a minute. So they're both stitched down. Now I'm overlocked that little piece just where the pocket is. Now I'm going to stitch that seam allowance to my pocket bag on the edge, just there. This will give you a nice crisp edge and help your pocket to disappear into your seam. So you want to do that for the other panel. So now we've got the pocket bags stitched to both sides of our skirt. We're going to put them together, right sides together, matching up the seams. Pop a few pins in. Matching up the key points. Okay, so starting from the waistline, we're going to stitch down and we're going to come to just this side of that seam where I've stitched the pocket bag to the skirt. And then we come all the way around the pocket bag and we come back again just to this side of that stitch line where the pocket bag is attached to the skirt again. It's only 1mm, just the tiniest amount, but it means that your pocket bag will fall within your seam and you won't see it when you're wearing your dress. Here we go, all the way around, just past that stitch line where we've joined the pocket bag to the skirt at the side seam, and then all the way down to the hem. Centimetre seam allowance all the way as usual. Okay, so let me show you. Can't see it that side. I think you can see it that side. Look, it's literally just sort of 1 stitch, maybe even 2 stitches away from that seam line. So then when you open it up, it won't show. Let's trim away some of this debris. Okay, so I'm going to overlock around the outside edge now. That's neatened it all up nicely. And let's have a look inside. And you'll see that that just disappears into the seam. Give that a quick press. Press your pocket bags towards the front skirt. Obviously they're both exactly the same, so you just make a decision which is your front at this point. Okay, so we're going to attach the skirt to the bodice now. There's my pocket. Remember that you've pressed those seams towards the front for the pockets, so you've got a front and a back now. That's my centre front. So I'm going to put some gathering threads in the top. I've just gone from side seam to side seam and back tacked off to start so that they don't come unthreaded. And I've done them exactly as before, 1 centimetre away from the raw edge and then 1/2 centimetre. So I'm finding my centre front point, and we know that that meets the bottom of the zip. So you've got those 2 little pieces of fabric, those folds that meet at the centre front. So pop those exactly on top of your centre front mark and pop a little pin in. Now we're going to find our bodice side seam and our skirt side seam. Again, remember you've pressed those to the front, the side seams on the skirt, so you don't have pockets on your bottom. Other side seam, yeah, so that needs to point to the front. Match the seams together. Side seam skirt, side seam bodice. Just make sure I've got that in the right place. Yep, that's it. Pop a pin in there, and then you want your centre backs. There's my centre back notch, and there's my skirt one. Okay, that's my key points pinned. Now you need to find the ends of your gathering threads. Pull those up, and you're just gathering the skirt now to fit the bodice. So pull your threads until that skirt is the same length at the waist as your bodice is at the waist, and it all lies nice and flat together. Take a little bit of time to titivate those gathers so that they lie nicely. It does make a difference, makes it easier to sew as well, although I always end up having a little final fiddle with it all as I go through the machine. So make sure you pin through where your darts are as well, so that your darts don't end up getting all ruckled up under your fabric. And I always stitch through from the gathered side, because I think again you can follow the stitch line of your first row of gathers so that you don't have to take anything out. You can't see the stitching, which is useful. It's another job that you don't have to do. You tend to get less puckering and gubs in it as well if you do it that way. There we go, last pin gone in. That all fits together nicely. I'm just going to stitch around it now from the inside. Here we go, stitching from the gathery side all the way around. Okay, just take any pins out that are still in there. Just do a double check and make sure you haven't got any tucks or puckers while you're unpinning, and then overlock or neaten that edge however you choose. There we go, looks much neater, doesn't it? Let's have a little look from the outside. That looks good. Lots of threads again. I'm just going to give that a little steam, just so it's not so poofy. There we go. Job done. Okay, so we're at the hem stage. We're nearly done. Hooray! Here we go. So, raw edge of my hem. I'm just going to turn it up 1 centimetre and then 1 centimetre again, and I'm going to stitch on the edge. Nice simple hem finish. You could press this before you stitch it if you choose. I'm going to just go for it. There we are, all stitched. Give it a quick press. Ta-da! There we go. Amazing. There you go, collar, pockets, cuffs. Just need a button and buttonhole for those cuffs, pockets and hem. Okay, so I'm going to put buttons on my cuffs. You could put big poppers on there. So I'm just going to use this mother of pearl button, and I'm just marking parallel where I want that to be, and where that first hole is where it's going to touch the inside of the buttonhole. So that's where I want my buttonhole to start. You'll notice I'm doing this on the edge that is flush with the vent, not the extended one. The cuff is about 4 centimetres deep, so I'm just going to mark the centre of the cuff, so it's 2 centimetres from the edge, so I know that where it crosses is where my button is going to be. Okay, so you can see I'd marked with some chalk there, and I've cut my button hole open, and the way I work out where the position is, I close up my cuff how it's going to be when it's on me, and then I'm just going to push a pin or a needle through the end of that buttonhole, so I know that is where I want that hole of my button to be, so that it will line up perfectly. So there's my button, and I'm just going to stitch it so that, there we go, just moved it across a little bit so I know where that first hole is will be where the end of my buttonhole rests. There we go, let's just check it. There you go, perfect. Beautiful. Job done. Well, I hope you've got something that looks exactly like this now. Enjoy.